Hi, this is mine and Max's presentation on empowering America's first people. With the discovery of the Americas at the end of the 15th century, it wasn't soon after that that European colonies such as the French, Dutch, and Spanish began to colonize the Americas. Native Americans had relatively beneficial relationships with the French and Dutch. However, around this time, Spanish conquistadors used the native population for their own economic benefit, all while relentlessly trying to change tribal customs and religious practices. Unfortunately, at this time, Native Americans were unaware of the Spanish' true intentions and the very nature of conquest. Devastatingly, the Spanish conquistadors themselves weren't the most deadly presence, but rather their European-born disease that the Native Americans had no natural immunity to, which ultimately reduced the once thriving population by 50 to 90%. About 100 years after the other European powers, British settlers first arrived to the colonies. The Native Americans and the British settlers at this time were able to coexist. However, the Native Americans early on, understandingly, had concerns that the settlers posed a threat to their territory. About 60,000 Native Americans lived within the New England colonies at this time. Trade and exchange were able to give both groups some common ground, and they lived in relative peace for the first few years of English occupation. The relationship between the British and the Native American peoples can be described as a convoluted story of trade, cooperation, and hostility. But before that last part about hostility, cooperation, the Native Americans showed settlers how to properly use the land and survive while simultaneously respecting animals and habitats. Before any of the European colonizers arrived, Native Americans were stewards of the land they lived on for 20,000 years. Let that sink in. How long has the United States existed as a country? 235 years is the exact number. That is less than 2% of the time that Native Americans were caring for our land. I am skeptical that at best the US will exist for even 50% of that time. Some simple examples of native land management are leaving crop fields fallow, an effort to regenerate the soil, or not overhunting a certain area to allow animal populations to rebound before hunting it again. Another example is controlled burns to increase soil fertility and dissuade densely forested ecosystems. As Native Americans were pushed out of their traditional territories, their beneficial land management practices left with them. While colonists heeded Native advice in times of survival, the pervasiveness of profit kept them from carrying on Native land management practices. Want to know why wildfires increased in severity after the Native peoples were pushed out? It is because ecosystems had literally evolved to rely on cyclic burning for their own health. As Lila June so eloquently puts it, Native Americans were a keystone species. Native Americans did not view the land as belonging to them, but rather as a right of life. Colonists came in and disrupted this system of thinking. Land, to them, was something to be bought and sold, something that accumulates value and can be profitable. This way of thinking began to cause conflict with the natives. In 1609 at Jamestown, settlers were on the brink of starvation after unsuccessful attempts to raid the native food stores. As most of the settlers died of starvation and were packing up to leave, Lord de War arrived from England with food and supplies. His arrival marked a shift in relations when he began waging aggressive military campaigns against the natives. This conflict is known as the First Anglo-Powhatan War. While a treaty was enacted in 1613, it only lasted for almost 10 years until 1622, when the Powhatan people made a major surprise attack on the settlers, killing nearly one-third of the settlers in modern-day Virginia. Even the term Powhatan tells a bigoted tale. This is the settler term for a diverse group of native tribes all speaking a common language. This second conflict is known as the Second Anglo-Powhatan War and really showed the harsh reality that native and colonial interests would never be parallel and their differences were not reconcilable. This conflicting relationship over land between the settlers and Native Americans was due to misunderstanding, cultural differences, and unwillingness. The settlers sought to own the land, while the Native Americans understood this ownership as permission to hunt and farm on the land. Throughout the 17th century, conflicts increased in frequency and severity. During 14 months in a conflict in 1675, known as King Philip's War, over 4,000 people died, nearly three-quarters of which were Native Americans. This conflict essentially wiped the native population off the map in the New England colonies. The remaining survivors either fled to the west or were sold into slavery, as the English population only increased. This starts the long history of oppressive and bigoted colonial land management practices. In superficial terms, colonial landscapes include picket fencing, stone walls, arbors, vegetable gardens, gravel walkways, and pavers. The colonists actually discouraged regular burning, allowing dead plant matter to build up to such a level that led to catastrophic wildfires. They overhunted, overfarmed, contaminated, and depleted the landscape of its resources, not to mention committing a major genocide on the North American continent. That is the word which describes the atrocity Native Americans faced as they were pushed out and boxed out from their native land, herded like animals to the least valuable plot. Not only will we march these people across the continent, but we will give them the land which is unsuitable for their traditional way of life. These are people with mothers and daughters and sons and fathers. It is easy to see history and forget that this is the story of real people who loved and cared and had wants and desires just like we do. About the land that the remaining tattered few were left with. It's largely infertile, unhuntable, and incompatible with Native Americans' traditional practices and ways of life. This leads into high rates of poverty among Native Americans in the 21st century. Their relationship with the land has not been respected. Native Americans were forced into American schools and relied on American food stamps because they couldn't grow their own food anymore. Slowly but surely, these last remaining few native nations have lost bits and pieces of their sovereignty and autonomy. By definition of the word, it should not be something that is taken, especially as our society moves further away from how the natives lived on this land for 20,000 years. This video shows the actual land that was taken over time. While the damage done has surpassed irreversible several times over, it is crucial to understand the impacts colonialism has had on the land we live on. The way property is structured, the history of oppression, this is all colonialism, and its legacy lives on today. For instance, national parks in the United States are spoken about in a natural history light. We talk about discovering them. We talk about the natural history of these places, not the human one of the people who cultivated the land for countless generations. Had the Americas been a truly virgin land, as the colonizer history suggests, the colonizers might not have been as successful in colonizing it. They relied on native knowledge to survive for many years. The genocide of these people has not stopped. According to 18 U.S. Code 1091, genocide is defined as whoever, whether in time of peace or in time of war, and with specific intent to destroy, in whole or in substantial part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. This happens actively. For example, Trump gave 85% of Bear Ears National Monument to oil drilling. This was previously native land and is a way of destroying an ethnic group. This is allowing corporations to exploit land and people. The current system of land management is built on colonial profit-based systems, and the only way forward is to allow native wisdom and practices to permeate our land management system, as well as acknowledge historical abuses and disinvestment in people and the environment.
The United States' long history of colonialization and Native American repression begs the question, what can we do in the present to heal the damage that has been done in the past? The answer is as simple as returning some of the land and resources that we've stolen, as well as trying harder to address current issues in Native American communities, but giving them greater say in the decisions our government makes. As discussed by my fellow classmates in previous presentations, Native Americans have a very complex relationship with the land that they inhabit, one that transcends physical ownership while also prioritizing balance and harmony within the ecosystems that they inhabit. For indigenous communities across the Americas, land isn't just a resource that is meant to be utilized, but a sacred entity that is deserving of respect and necessary to their cultural and spiritual identities. The concept of land stewardship, as opposed to land ownership, is a key facet of Native American beliefs. Unlike the Western notion of land being property, indigenous peoples view themselves as custodians responsible for caring for and living in tandem with the earth. This responsibility is rooted in spiritual beliefs that see the land as a living entity, deserving of reverence and respect. Practices such as ceremonies, rituals, and storytelling serve to honor and maintain the sacred relationship. But due to the lasting effects of colonialism, these practices are limited to taking place on just a fraction of the land that they once did. Ceremonies play a key role in Native American spiritual practices, often conducted in specific locations chosen for their cultural and historical significance. These ceremonies serve various purposes, from honoring ancestors and seeking guidance to celebrating harvests or making life milestones. And all of these rituals maintain reverence to the surrounding lands. The Inipi, for example, have what is called a sweat lodge ceremony that involves the use of a small dome-shaped structure where participants engage in purification rituals, prayer, and reflection. The lodge itself is sustainably constructed using natural materials found in the land, symbolizing the interconnectedness between humans and nature. Similarly, the vision quest is a tradition practiced by many Native American tribes, where an individual seeks spiritual guidance and insight through solitary retreats in nature. These quests typically involve fasting, meditation, and communing with the land, with participants often journeying to remote wilderness areas to connect with the natural world and receive visions or revelations. Ceremonies like these ones showcase how land stewardship is directly tied in with the indigenous heritage and way of life, to the point where the two are inseparable. However, due to colonialism, the amount of land that Native Americans have access to has been greatly diminished, meaning their ceremonies and way of life are restricted as well. For centuries, indigenous peoples have been subjected to displacement and cultural erasure at the hands of colonial powers and settler societies. However, despite enduring unimaginable hardships and injustices, Native American communities continue to persevere, preserving their cultural heritage and some of their ancestral lands. Allocating more land to Native Americans would be an act of justice and a great step forward in the process of restoring indigenous ways of life because it would help to mitigate centuries of historical wrongs whilst honoring their inherent rights to sovereignty. Since the arrival of European colonizers in the Americas, Native American lands have been systematically seized through forced displacement, broken treaties, and government-sanctioned policies of assimilation. By returning some of the indigenous lands to the people that lost them, we may begin to heal the wound that our forefathers created, making peace with the earth and returning balance to Native American ways of life. In addition to the historical trauma inflicted upon Native American communities, it continues to reverberate throughout the generations, perpetuating cycles of poverty, disenfranchisement, and social inequity. The legacy of colonialization has left deep scars on both the way of life and psyche of the indigenous peoples, manifesting in high rates of poverty, unemployment, and an uncountable amount of mental health issues within Native American communities. By allocating more land to Native Americans, policymakers have an opportunity to address the root causes of these social ills and empower indigenous communities to begin their path towards healing and self-determination. However, even more can be done to help empower the indigenous population in America. By involving Native Americans more in governmental decisions that involve them, we are giving them back the voice that our country's founders took from them. Giving Native Americans more power in governmental decisions shows that we, as a society, still care about them and their way of life. As previously discussed, indigenous peoples have a unique relationship with the land and a rich tapestry of cultural, spiritual, and linguistic diversity that deserve to be considered when making decisions that affect their population. By including Native American voices in the decision-making process, policymakers can ensure that the concerns and priorities of indigenous communities are heard and respected, creating greater trust, fairness, and reverence in legal processes. Involving Native Americans in governmental decisions isn't just a matter of representation, but a recognition of their inherent rights as human beings, and a great step forward in healing the damage that has been done by colonialism. Indigenous peoples have distinct political, legal, and treaty rights that must be respected and upheld in accordance with international law and the principles of justice. So by engaging in consultation and collaboration with Native American tribes and nations, our government can honor their treaty obligations and harbor partnerships that are fair and not exploitative, unlike previous broken promises that our government traditionally has made. Additionally, involving Native Americans in governmental decisions is essential for addressing pressing social, economic, and health disparities within indigenous communities brought on by colonialism. By involving Native Americans in the design, implementation, and evaluation of policies and programs, governments can ensure that resources are targeted effectively, needs are addressed comprehensively, and solutions are tailored to their unique cultural, linguistic, and historical contexts. The imperative to return land and resources to Native American communities is not just a matter of rectifying historical injustices, but an issue of morality, justice, equity, and reconciliation. For centuries, indigenous peoples have endured hardships brought about by colonialism, dispossession, and marginalization, yet their resilience, wisdom, and cultural heritage endure as beacons of hope. Restoring land and resources to Native American communities is not about charity or benevolence, but about recognizing their honor and very existence. By returning what was unjustly taken, our government and society can begin on a path towards healing, reconciliation, and a more equitable future for all. It is time to heed the voices of Indigenous peoples and to stand in solidarity as allies in the ongoing struggle to reverse the effects of colonialization. In the pursuit of a more just, inclusive, and sustainable world, let us walk hand in hand with Native American communities, honoring their rich past, empowering them in the present, and giving them hope for a brighter future. Thank you.